Ryanair and Ideaknow. It is a great pleasure to have you here today to share with us your personal Odyssey. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Inaki to share with us more about his personal Odyssey.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm going to share my screen. And yeah, so please confirm that everything is okay. Can you watch my presentation? Yeah, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to participate in the Odyssey Hackfest hackathon. I think that is a very good idea. When I received the invitation, I was very happy. And yeah, so this presentation is about, it's going to be a little bit different about from the ones that I'm usually doing, right? So my background is like a software engineer, and usually I do presentations a little bit technical about Android, about build tools, about espresso automation test. But because I think that this presentation is about like, well, encouraging the people in the hackathon as well. So I want to give some different perspective. So as you can see, you know, I'm not young, right? So anymore. So actually I'm 41 years old, and I have been working with software around 20 years. It's going to be next year, right? And I think that it's going to be interesting to share my experience, right? And what things I saw during my career that they are important, other not. And that's something that I hope that is going to help you. Yeah, this presentation, I'm going to cover different topics. So first of all, here is my Twitter. That's my personal account in case that you want to send me your holidays, pictures, or whatever. But another thing that I want to mention is that I really like the topic or the Odyssey concept of the hackathon, right? It's a great book, right? And I think that covers, right? So this amazing journey that the protagonist, the main role on the novel, Homer, is going home, right? And that's why I want to use this concept to show like how was like my trip. Okay, so first of all, you know, we are always talking about the ego slide, a little bit more about myself. So again, this is in regarding the main topic of this hackathon, right? The Odyssey. And yeah, so that's me sailing. That's something that, well, sailing, I would say that I'm learning how to sail. You know, during this pandemic, I think that, well, most of us, we learn different things. And yeah, so I'm living in Los Angeles, and that's one of the things that I was trying to do to fill the time, right? Trying to learn some skills. And before entering in more in detail about who I am, so I want to change a little bit and say that who I am not, right? And I think that that's something important, right? So I'm not a startup investor, so I'm not a VC, and I didn't sell any startup. And here is my first takeaway, right? So my presentation is going to be from the perspective of the software engineer. But I know that some of you are here, so you're going to work with coding and it's going to be useful, right? But other people maybe they have another skills or another perspective. Maybe they are very good, like trying to be like a CEO, CTO. And that's something that sometimes is like, I don't know. So that I have learned, right? I have seen during my experience. It's like, so it's not like you don't have to take advice for those people, but you know, so some people in your career, you will see that they're going to say, no, but you need to do that to sell your startup or to make like more scalable, but they never sell a startup, right? So, and that's my first takeaway, right? So I'm not going to tell you how to build like a successful startup because, you know, so I always been working as a software engineer, but that's something that I want like to take like a first takeaway. But on the other side, so I'm a solutions engineer, actually at Gradle in the Gradle Enterprise team. I don't know if you're familiar with Gradle. Gradle is a build tool. Actually, it's quite cool because Gradle is an open source project and we are building products, commercial products on top of Gradle. Actually, Gradle, it could be considered like a startup. It's like a Series C. Last year raised about 21, 27 million, I don't remember. But again, so I'm just a software engineer there. So I mean, it's not like I raised the money, right? But that's something that, yeah, it's closer to the startup world. And additionally, I have to say that I'm Google developer expert in Android and Kotlin. That's a program from Google that allows to, well, to have like a better visibility in terms of the community. And you are like a point of contact sometimes between Google and the local communities as well. Okay, so that's the thing that, let me put something, yeah. First of all, so because I love the concept of the hackathon with the Odyssey, right, topic, this history about the coming back home in a long journey. And I want to show you my journey. As I mentioned, so well, so 20 years of software development is a lot, right? So, and I'm originally from Spain. And from this island, I don't know if you have opportunity to visit the island, but it's beautiful. In summer, it's a little bit overcrowded, but well, again, so it's beautiful. That's the Mediterranean Sea. So, and my journey as software developer started in Mallorca. I spent 6 years working for the second or third airline company, and I was doing like very corporative software work with XML, with Oracle, with some Java too, and I spent some times. But my next journey goes to Barcelona. After working 6 years in Mallorca, I moved to Barcelona, and I was working there for a company that called Ideaknow, and it was at the time where Android was becoming a thing. I'm talking about the beginning of 2011 or something like that. So at that time, the Android was like very small, but we were becoming something big. And it was quite nice, my experience there, because well, we develop products. For instance, for Google Glasses, I don't know if you remember, there was one product from Google that in theory allows you to, well, you know, you have like a small screen on the glass and you can develop apps. So we actually developed one app for Google Glass for a bank that the idea was to scan the checks using VCR, right? And this was like an app, and it was quite awesome, right? But it was very experimental, everything about that. Then we did cool things like an app for Google TV. Google TV was the previous attempt from Google of Android TV, right? It was the first version, and we did an app actually for a bank for the TV. If you ask me, right? So it maybe it was useless, right? But at that time, we were very motivated by the innovation, right? They're like totally new. And as well, we developed one app for Kindle Fire for the bank, for the same bank. And again, so it was like totally new about this. Okay, after Barcelona, what's going on? I moved to Dublin, Ireland, the beautiful island of Ireland. And yeah, specifically to Dublin, I spent there, I think that was like 1 year and a half, and working for Ryanair. Ryanair is the low-cost company, well, the most important low-cost company in Europe. I think that's quite similar to, well, similar to AirAsia. So it was very interesting, right? Because at that time in Europe, the air flight market was like driven by this all state-based companies, right? Like, I don't know, so the typical companies like Air France, KLM, Lufthansa, and so on. And this company, since the beginning of at the end of the beginning of the 2000s, started to disrupt the market, right? And it was quite interesting to see how, yeah, another way to understand this industry was working. So, and of course, so AirAsia was like the same in this case, right? And there, in the app, in the company Ryanair, I spent some time working for the app. They have some hybrid app. That means that it's using different web technologies, and we wanted to do something native. So we developed the app from scratch. And yeah, it worked very well. So imagine, so having at that time like millions of customers that they were using the app to print to get the boarding pass, something that is normal today, right? But at that time was like something new, quite interesting. After Ryanair, I spent some time working for one company that they were doing the white labeling apps for AT&T and Verizon. So imagine if you buy a phone of one operator, sometimes they have like some apps. So I was working on this kind of apps. Okay, next step, surprise. I spent 3.5 years in Bangkok, in Thailand, working for Agoda. And I can tell you that, well, so all the memories, all the experiences, adventures, that's incredible. So, of course, the app or the company Agoda, so it's like, well, was like one of the top applications in terms of it's a spike of bookings. So I remember from where I joined the company until I left the company, it was like maybe, I don't know, 200 or 300% in terms of bookings in the Android app. So it was something amazing. At the same time, I just, as I mentioned, travel around the area, but as well, I was joining different local communities in terms of conferences. So I was lucky enough to go to KL to participate in one DevFest. I remember I could be in 2017. And I went 3 times to participate in the GDG Georgetown in Penang. So it was lovely too. So actually, and you know, after living a pandemic, I can tell you that, well, looking back and seeing my times there in Thailand, it was like amazing, right? So, and then my current step, right? My current stage in life is like I moved in 2019 from Bangkok to Los Angeles in California. And I started working on Tinder. So, well, if you know, well, Tinder is a dating app. I think that is like the most popular dating app in the world. And yeah, I was working purely as build engineer. So it was great. It was very interesting to see how how works the company in a pandemic level too, right? And yeah, since like 4 months ago, I joined Gradle. Again, Gradle is the build system, and Gradle Enterprise is the commercial product. And that's where I am now, right? So, and as you can see, so still I didn't arrive home. So I'm still in this journey, right? So, and that's, again, the main topic of this presentation, right? So I cannot describe like, no, that's my end. Now I can tell that I did everything. No, so I consider myself that still I need to go back home, right? And that's how like this journey is. So, and you can say that, well, for some people, this journey is like maybe 1 year, or like in the book, 10 years, right? But for me, it's taking longer, right? But that's like the like how things are, right? So okay, so and now entering a little bit more in materials. So I think that for this journey of the things that I have seen during this amazing voyage, right, is like things that are important, right? So, and first of all, we need to talk about foundations. Why foundations? So we are living in a world that constantly we are changing, right? Technologies, platforms, frameworks. And sometimes it's like a little bit overwhelming to think that, well, so 15 years ago, the Android development didn't exist, right? Or the iOS development, the iPhone development didn't exist, but the technology or the software engineering was there. That's why I want to go through different elements that personally I found very interesting. So, and again, so this is like a toolbox that you have to have in your career, right? So I think that that's not something that you need to learn in like in only one time, right? For me, some of these items are important because, well, are a continuous learning. So that's something that you're not going to have all the skills with like 2 years. So that's something is constant learning, and depending of the job, the roles that you are doing, you're going to have a more opportunity to invest of one of these types. But overall, so I think that in terms of working, you need to be strong in one of the static type languages. So what is a static type languages? You can think in something about Java, C#, Scala, Kotlin, Swift, or C++. There are thousands of them, right? Or hundreds, better. But that's something that you're going to find everywhere in your career. So knowing about the static type of language means that you know how, like, well, what are types? That's why the name. So that means that the compiler is going to, well, to make the verifications for you, right? In the opposite to the next item that we're going to see. But actually having good skills in one of these languages, or in general in one static type language, is going to give you the foundations to move to different languages, right? So at the end, the processes, how it works, these languages, it's going to be the same. It's going to change how to write the code, but the concepts are going to be the same. Okay. The next point is about dynamic languages or interpreted languages. That's like a little slightly different from the previous point where we are discussing about the static types. Here is like dynamic. That's something that is quite cool at the beginning of the career. And I think that you need to have, you have to feel comfortable in one of these languages too, because at the end, you cannot say that, no, I'm only a Java developer. So that's not important at the end, right? So because maybe in your workday or in your startup, you need to do something with a dynamic language, with Ruby or with Python, for instance, and you need to have like the versatility to do that. So that's the second item. The third item is about network, right? So if you want or not, so everything is going to be connected. Unless that you're working in very specific project or startup, you're going to send or request information from the cloud, from the network. Even now with Tesla, right? So Teslas are constantly sending information too, right? And knowing how works the network in terms of TCP/IP or HTTP, it's important. Of course, you shouldn't have like this knowledge in a low level, right? So because it's something more about network engineers, but I'm sure that sooner or later you need to do a request to a server, or you need to understand why a login it's not working, or why your server is not up. So having the knowledge on the network is something quite important that is going to be useful in your career. Databases. So on the other side, we have the persistent storage. So again, network, it's something that we are going to use, right? But as well, connections to databases. So databases are quite important, or always been important, and that's a way where we are storing the information and how we access this information. There are thousands of different databases, but the foundations and how it works, they're quite similar. We have different variants, different types of databases. You can have like JSON databases where you're storing only documents, right? You have the relational databases to the modern SQL. So don't be overwhelmed, but at the end, so that's something that is going to be with you in all your path too. So at the end, when you have, when you are using or you are building the next Instagram, you need to store the pictures that you have requested from network. And that's one of the things, important things in your toolbox. Another thing that, you know, so some people maybe don't pay attention, right? So it's about Unix, right? So Unix or Linux, that's one OS that is used across the world, right? So all the different technologies that we have nowadays so are based on Unix. And of course, you don't need to know, right, how it works internally, what's like a process in Unix, but that's something interesting because nowadays, I can tell you that, for instance, from the static type languages, Java was created in 1993, 4, don't remember. Kotlin was like maybe 10 years ago. Swift, the same. So Unix is there like from the 1970s or something like this, and it still is there, right? Some tools like Find are like this, well, are almost the same. And this one book that is called The Art of Programming in Unix, that's absolutely a gem, because you can see that how the simplicity on how Unix is built, that is becoming still one of the most powerful tools. So we can imagine that maybe that's something very complex of hackers, but the simplicity was one of the main topics in this operating system. And today, even so, for instance, Docker, right? So how works Docker is based on the C groups of Unix, right? So still we are using this kind of for virtualization, this kind of concepts from Unix. So again, you don't need to know about that, but you know, if you feel comfortable with Unix, you know about bashing file systems, permissions. That's something that is going to be helpful when you are investigating one issue or when you want to develop a new product and you want to isolate the file system of a new user, right? So if you're working with cloud, for instance. Okay, and the final point that's a little bit, well, I could put like algorithms, right? But you know, so we have like different algorithms, but I would say that lately graph algorithms, that's something that is becoming more and more important, right? And at the end, so graph algorithms, they're going to be useful, or they are useful today. The typical example is with communications, how you want to enroute data to one node to another. But social networks are based on graph algorithms. So sooner or later, you need to understand that. So, and I picked graph algorithms because when you want to traverse or iterate over a graph, you're going to use another data structures like a stack, like a queue, right? That's why I think that knowing and learning about graph algorithms is going to help you to see another data structures that you are going to be using in the future too. Okay, again, so these are like the toolbox that you need to have. But again, that's not something that you need to have like from the first day. So for me, for instance, so it's taken like 10 years or 15 years, right? So, but taking account that that's something cool here. For instance, so if we are trying to, well, you want to hire a mobile engineer right now, even if it's Android or if it's iOS, so you are going to ask for Kotlin or Swift. Of course, because a mobile engineer has to work with apps, needs to work with the network, right? So you're going to request knowledge about network, not in terms of low level, but so if you're having you're retrieving one picture for Instagram and you don't have connectivity, you need to know how to react, right? Or that you need to do a retry, right? This kind of techniques or strategies in terms of requesting data from the network, there is something that is going to be useful. That's why that's one of the cool skills. At the same as databases, once we retrieve the picture, we want to store the picture. And as you can see, a mobile engineer, so having this toolbox, we are going to fit there. Then a backend engineer. So backend engineer needs to know or may know about Java or may know about Ruby, but as well, so the backend engineer needs to process the request and as well knows how to work with the databases. You see that, so knowing these foundations, still you can move from different roles, right? And what about the DevOps goal? DevOps, of course, he needs to be very strong in terms of Unix and know about databases, networks. But maybe it's not important to know Java, right? But having like these foundations is going to help him. And finally, something that, well, of course, I'm not very familiarized, but with machine learning, right? So having the knowledge of graph algorithms, knowing databases, dynamic languages is going to help you too. So my point here is that having this approach, right, you are not focusing to one specific role, because at the end, things are going to change if you want or not, right? So again, so when I started maybe in 2006, well, the mobile development, it was not massive like now. That's why. So I mean that's I think a good starting point to having like this scheme of what the things are important that you can spend your time. Then I want to give some techniques, right? So that I think that overall they're not considered like so important, but I think that should be a discipline that you have to get. So unit testing, that's something that is part of the software development. Some people, some companies say that maybe I don't have time to test, but as soon as possible, you get the discipline that always when you are working, you write tests. This is going to be with you forever, right? And unit testing is like the contract that you are offering to the user, to your boss, to your team, that your work is working and it's not breaking. So take this advice. So as soon as you start working, unit tests, always share with your code. Static tools, that's something that you are going to find in your career. So you have different static tools like lint, like detect. At the end, so we want to check how the code, well, we want to format the code. We want to ensure that we don't have any convention broken, because we want to ensure that everything is like with these spaces, with these names, with this format. So that's something quite common in all the companies. And so at the beginning, maybe you are not going to pay attention, but I can tell you that always is there. Then the compiler. So this is like maybe, and I don't know if I should put it there. It's a little bit advanced, right? But knowing how work a compiler is going to help you a little bit, right? So not in low level, again, not knowing the instructions, no, but these different phases where a compiler first is building like an abstract syntax tree, or how it's parsing the different tokens. that's something that it has a lot of different use cases. So maybe it's a little bit advanced, sure, but I can tell you that helps too. Profiling, again, so if you're working with big projects or with small projects, that's something that you need to do at the end of the day. So imagine that you're creating your startup and you have a problem that, I don't know, when you have 1,000 concurrent requests, something is happening. So you need to investigate. And profiling is an advanced topic too, but that's something that you want to start investing some time. And finally, caching. So caching is one mechanism that is everywhere, from the browser, from the CPU, from in your apps, everywhere. And that's something that the paradigm is, if I have something already calculated or downloaded or stored, I don't want to retrieve it again. And you're going to see constantly. Mastering the techniques of caching is going to be difficult, but until mastering, if you start to control this technique, it's going to help you always, because caching is always present in all the different software development components, always. Okay, so, and yeah, so I think that there was like a lot of things, and maybe you want to, well, I can tell you, well, where you can start, right? So that's something that it has changed, right? So I think that we have like, I would say that we have like, of course, different two main options, right? So I mean that we have the university environment, right? This well, the computer science, right? So, or as well, in the last 5-10 years, we have seen that the rise of different platforms where we can enrich ourselves, right? So, and sometimes you can find yourself, right, saying that, well, maybe I can go directly to this path and I can learn by myself everything, right, in Coursera, whatever. But at the same time, so the formation of the university is great, right? So universities are institutions that they were there since like 1,000 years ago. And all the advances in terms of the humanity started at the university, right? So I know everything, well, from the computer science, how it works like a CPU, a memory, like the transistors and everything. But it's true that lately, in this recent years, so we have this opportunity to learn by yourself in these platforms. So you have available GitHub, you have available Stack Overflow. So never has been more easier to you start working or start learning from your side, right? And I can tell you that in this, well, in the last 5 years or 6 years, I did like more than 200 interviews to candidates. And honestly, so I can tell you that never we checked which university was coming the candidate. So of course, right, so with that, I mean that there are other careers like medicine, like law, right, where even here in the States is very important, right, for medicine. No, I'm coming from Harvard, right? So that's something that say the name, but not in IT, not in software, right? So that's something that is not true there. We are not looking for your CV from where was your university degree. But yeah, so actually you have like the model, right? Where, for instance, the MIT is publishing the complete complete elements that they have like in the degree. For instance, in this case, like it's introduction with algorithms, and it's very low level, right? And again, so I cannot tell you what to do or what not to do, but it's important to say that we are a little bit privileged because we can choose, right? But I can tell you only the cons, right, of both sides, right? So in terms of you choose, don't pick like the university path, I can tell you the cons. And first of all is the immigration. And I can tell you because, well, in my case, so I step over I avoid the university and I was like constant learning, right? And I moved to different countries. So it's a problem, right? But well, at the end, you can see my case and still I'm working in different countries, but always, right? So when you try to immigrate, you want to work in UK, you want to work in the States, right? So a degree is going to be helpful, right? And doesn't matter if you have like 3 successful startups and you are working as a software engineer, right? So for the immigration officers, they don't care about that, right? They have rules and they have to follow. Another thing that is a con is the discipline, right? So discipline regarding that, well, in the university, you learn how to think, right? And that's something that's, for me, the most valuable thing of the universities, right? This abstraction over the problems, that's something that you don't have if you go by your own, right? And that's something that you need to acquire during your career. Then constant learning, not about because things change, but because maybe you need to show yourself that you want to, well, that you are there, right, at the same level, and maybe you are more eager to trying to learn more things, and you have like, I don't know, so maybe this feeling. And finally, another cons is government jobs, right? So I don't know, but well, in case that you want to work for the government, in this case, well, a degree is required. And that's something that is not enough to be like, I don't know. So for instance, Bill Gates, right? So I mean, that doesn't matter. On the other side, I want to mention the cons of the university. Okay, because well, I have seen like people are on the same role, right? So, and I would say that's something that, yeah, you know, it's a little bit funny, but guess that, well, money in your early 20s, right? If you follow your professional career, right? So when you finish the university, usually you're going to work as an intern in one company. And I have seen sometimes that we have one guy with 20 years that enter as intern, but then we have one guy that is earning like 100,000 on the same age, right? Because he has like the development experience, right? And that's something that, of course, during the time is going to be a little bit more compensated, right? But that's funny things, right? So I remember that one intern, Robert, he was complaining and he was very good, but because he finished the career and he didn't have the experience, he has to go through the internship. And we have people with the same age, like making like a lot of money, right? And I guess that when you want to get out of the university, you want to get your money, right? So yeah, of course, well, what independence. So I think that's something similar about that, right? So you are a little bit, right, tied to the university process. That's totally fine, right? But I mean, in the other side, you don't have. The experience, that's something that is related with my previous comments. And finally, the expectations. Maybe in software, in IT computer science, we don't have this problem, but I remember that in Spain, for instance, right? So we have like a ugly crisis, like, and we had a lot of people with degrees, right? But there was like no jobs, right? And they have like great expectations, right? Because they had a degree that they have to work, right? And there was like a little bit of frustration, right? Because at the end, here we are entering a little bit in the IT. Things are changing quickly, right? So, and sometimes we're putting these expectations on the education, right? But sometimes it's the market that defines or model shapes the current trend. So if you ask me my recommendation, I will go with the university, but I will complement with the self-development, right? Because at the end, so the university is the way to go, because again, there are institutions like that exist for more than 1,000 years, and they are the source of the knowledge. And some people say that, well, but Steve Jobs didn't go to the university, or Bill Gates went out. Okay, right? So, but these guys, they changed the world in terms of money. I mean, we cannot say that, well, at the end, Microsoft, when it was like important in the 80s, is because they transformed the model of software and selling an operative system to the final user, to us. Before that, it was impossible. So nobody was saying that, hey, I'm using in my car this operative system, or I'm using in this server this operative system. But Bill Gates made the things around, and everybody was saying, no, I'm using Windows 95, I'm using Windows 98. But at the end, so how works internally Windows, or how work internally Windows in terms of the processors, memory? There was not a big innovation in that. So the innovation was in how they sell the product, and the same with Apple. So I mean that in terms of advances of the humanity, right, we can see that maybe the MRI is more important, in terms of the, the health of the people, than the iPhone itself. Of course, we have apps that we can save, right? But the truth is, like, at the end, so for one person in 1 million, what matters is money at the end when you are selling your startup, right? We want to change the world, of course, right? But when you are in the first round of investors, the same name described, right? So it's like investors, right? We are talking about money. So I think that, again, the key here is to get the foundations on the university, the way to think, and complement with self-development, personally self-development. Okay, so the next section in this presentation is about the domain, right? So this picture represents like galleon, right? So it's like the structure. And that's one of the most important concepts that you can apply to a startup, you can apply to your software skills, to everything. The domain should be the central part of your product, of your application. So maybe it sounds a little bit abstract, but if you think in something like a boat, right? So the domain of the boat, at the end, so it is the keel, maybe, right? So the sails, right? So all the different concepts, right? So it doesn't matter if I'm using the rudder, or I'm using the mast or the boom, right? They are core concepts of a boat. So if I change to another boat, the mast and the boom are still the same concepts. So having the knowledge of the domain of the boat, that's going to be a key part for your progress in your easier. So at the beginning of my career, I was working in one company that we were using this approach, right? So we have a manager, and then we have an analyst. The analyst was the one that was taking the functional requirements from the client and in coordination with the manager. And then the functional requirements taken by the analyst was given to the developer. So the developer at the end, he didn't know anything about the product itself. So was saying, no, I have to work, or the developer was me, right? I need to work on this screen. I need to work with these colors, and I need to use this request. But that was like the information. And that's totally, with the time, I have seen that was totally incorrect. What's the correct model? And this doesn't apply only for the software engineer, as well for the startups. So the domain, again, lies on the center of everything, right? The company. So, and around the domain, like, we can have like this common language between all the company. So this is called like ubiquitous language, something like this, where if I speak with the CEO, so I'm using the same language in terms of the startup. If I'm speaking with the designer, I'm talking about the same language, right? So I want to the designer to develop one boom that is faster, so one mast, or I want to make the sails bigger in the boat. I want to use a different wheel, so I can talk with these different elements. So the marketing department is going to tell me that, well, maybe you need to do like the sails bigger because we want to more people to see you sailing on that boat. The designer is going to tell me that, well, maybe this sail is blue, or maybe this sail is paired with the color blue. And maybe the engineer is going to tell me, well, maybe the surface of the sail should be less because whatever, right? So, and one day, the CEO will come and will ask me, hey, Inaki, how's going with the sales? So again, I'm not entering in any specific detail about the product, not in terms of the designer, not in terms of the marketing, but it's quite clear for all the company that the domain is the boat. So we know what is a deck, we know what is a hull, we know what is a mast, and that's the point. Let me put you something more descriptive. So, well, I said before that I was working in Tinder, and one of the core concepts of Tinder, it's a match, right? It's a match means that when two people like each other and they start a conversation, right? But jokes aside, so a match, this is a screen, and we don't know if it's Android or iOS of Apple, because a match is a domain concept. It's the same for both platforms. So it doesn't matter if I'm talking about well, it doesn't matter if I'm telling that, well, maybe we need to calculate the volume of match for this given country, or one designer is telling me, well, maybe the match screen, we need to do another thing. And you see, so talking again about a core concept of the domain, so is common for all the different departments. And again, that looks like very maybe evident, right? So, but as I told you in the first slide of this section, so I was working in a company where I didn't have any idea about like what was like the core concept. So I was told that I need to draw, in this case, this input, this edit text here, or maybe I should have like to change this color, right? But understanding that what is a match, that's something that will help you. And you are creating a new startup, that's something that try to keep from the beginning too. And again, if we move now from Tinder to Agoda, what's the main core concept of Agoda? A hotel. So the same hotel is the same for iOS, is the same for Android, is the same from web, excuse me. And that's something that helps. So, and this is like in a scale of talking about companies itself. But if we discuss about software, that's something that is going to be very helpful, and I can guarantee you that. So once I was mastering this technique, it was much easier. And that means that because the concept is keeping in the center the domain, that means that you are building agnostic the different chains that you can have. For instance, it doesn't matter that the user interface or the infrastructure or the different databases. Now, here is not like very well, but in terms of software, that's the mental model that you have to have, like put the domain in the center. And what means put the domain in the center? It means that your use cases or your interactors are going to be like independent or agnostic of the implementation details. So book hotel for Agoda could be like one use case in the domain. If I'm using, instead of HTTP, I'm starting to use like, well, instead of REST API, I'm starting to use protobuf or whatever, right? So this is an implementation detail. if instead of storing my information about the hotel, I'm using like, instead of the local storage, I'm using another storage like the remote storage, it's an implementation detail. Your business logic doesn't change the implementation details. So that's why. And again, so one of the cool things about that, and you will see that when you're doing interviews in some companies are going to tell you, no, please try to complete this example or try to do this exercise. So if you master this technique, it's going to be very easier, right? Because always the business logic is going to be isolated in the center, and then you can work in the different parts, right? If now it's popular to use, I don't know, Firebase, well, okay, this is an implementation detail. And yeah, so I can give you a more specific case about how to use this technique in terms of the domain, right? It's a little bit more advanced, but in Android, so during these 10 years, we have had different techniques or paradigms to work, right? So not always since the beginning, because it was like, it was a constant learning as well for Google too. And using this approach, so you survive to this kind of change. So here in our application, we have the domain in the center, right? And then I want to talk about the threading model, right? Not the threading model, but how you are going to do operations in background. In Android, we have one restriction that, or one recommendation that we don't need, or we don't want to block the user. Right, so it's like when you're using Twitter and you want to refresh the tweets in the list in the recycle view, and you don't want to block the user. That's why the operation of requesting more tweets is happening in the background. And how works these operations in background? That's the topic. So at the beginning, with Android, the recommendation was to use one thing that it was called a sync task. But later changed to React streams or RxJava. So we were scheduling this call in different threads. We were doing, of course, more operations, but still the domain was the same. And finally, since like Kotlin, we were using coroutines. So with that, I want to show you that keeping the domain, right, with this abstraction, separating totally these boundaries, so we don't care about the implementation details about how works this backend model. And that's a real a real use case of the domain layer in that case. So overall, think that the domain, so if you are interested, there is one book called Domain-Driven Design from Mark Evans, I guess that is the name, that it's going to explain better than me all this whole concept about the complexity of software. And I cannot recommend you more to start like thinking on this way, right? So not only in terms of software, that it's totally recommended, but as well, if you have more of CTO or no mentality, right? So try to keep the boundaries, right? So in terms of what's the domain, what's the use case, let's try that everybody talks the same language, right? So, and this is going to be more helpful for your company too. Okay, the next big section, or the next section, is about adaptation, right? So that's something that, yeah, time flies, right? Different technologies, different paradigms, different everything, right? And we need to adapt, right? So, and here's something that I have seen that, you know, I think that we were told sometimes, right? So the people with most talent, with more talent, or the people, or the stronger people, that's the one that survives, right? This is pieces theory or whatever, right? So, but let me ask you a question, right? So if we have a, I don't know, a very bad situation in the world, right? So what do you think that is going to survive? The rat of the lion? It's going to be the rat, right? And in terms of the strength, in terms of everything, the lion is better. But the rat adapts better. And that's the key, right? So sometimes within that, so the betters or the biggest, the strongest are the ones that survive. And that's not true. So I think that on the book of Homo sapiens, the author Hariri was explaining that in terms of the human race, at the same time that us, there was like I don't remember the name, right? So I don't want to say something that is incorrect, but there was like another species that they were stronger, right? So, and they were like a little bit taller than us, right? But we were adapting better to the situations, to the environment, and that's the key, right? So that's something that I've seen during my career, honestly, right? So you will work with people that they are, oh my God, so yeah, they are awesome, right? They have like a mind abstraction in terms of computing. Oh, that's crazy. The same in terms of marketing, the same in terms of design, right? But not always, right? So they are going to be successful for any reason that maybe we are going to see later. But that's how you adapt to the change. It's going to be crucial. And now let's start with more about talking about startups, right? So companies. So the market is crazy, right? So when you are building something, you have to compete with 10 more companies. So, and you need to adapt, right? And this is one technique. If you are going, this is more about high level in terms of startups, is that you need to start knowing like the A/B testing, right? The A/B testing is a technique where you are going to use different options to the user and you're going to measure. So this example is extracted from this URL. You have like your visitors and you have some A/B test. So for two of these users, you are going to display an option A. For the other users, you're going to display the option B. So the difference in terms of simplicity here is that option A has a button of blue color, and option B has an option that the button is color red. And this button means could be like booking. So you have like a website or a purchase button. You are selling sunglasses, and this button buys the sunglasses. So then you analyze how many bookings comes from or how many sales comes from the blue button, and then you analyze how many sales comes from the red button. And you realize that you have 24% of the sales are coming from this button and 17% from this button. So you infer that using the red color in the button for buy a sunglass is much better. How do you get this information? Because you have applied the A/B testing. And this is quite simple. I can tell you that in terms of A/B testing in companies, in big companies like Tinder or Agoda, it was absolutely crazy, right? And it's one of the key components of this world that we are living, because you need to constantly test new things, right? So that's not something that we can guarantee that we are going to have this engagement with the users. And setting this concept of A/B testing from the beginning in your startup, that's something that is going to be helpful, right? Don't wait too much, right? Because sooner or later, you need to adapt. And having like this framework or this opportunity to have it like very clear, this is going to be very, very important for you. And yeah, so another technique in terms of adaptation is analytics, right? So of course, A/B testing, they're going to give you metrics of a specific cases, but since the beginning, you need to think in analytics too. So analytics, so we have like very advanced platforms nowadays, but since that day one, you need one platform. It's going to give you insights about countries, about users, about everything, right? And understanding how is the usage, is how you are going to adapt yourself, right? Much better. And yeah, so regarding these 2 points, but in terms of software, something that I saw failing almost always in all the companies is that we are not considering from the beginning these 2 important parts, like A/B testing and analytics. So of course, right, so engineers, we are very proud and we have a lot of ego, right? And no, I want to build the perfect architecture, I want to do something. I think that's perfect, but the real world, what matters is how you are building your product. And for building your product, you need a A/B testing framework and you need analytics. And that's why that sometimes we forget about these things, right? And we have a perfect layered with the domain, with the application layers, with the infra, with the framework, so on. And yeah, you know, we don't take care about these things. And that's something that we want to do from the beginning. So if you are building the architecture of your project, right, think about these components. A/B testing and analytics are going to be there always. And okay, in terms of adaptation, right? So in the startup world, that's something very typical that we heard, right? It's like about build fast and break things, right? But not in terms of break things, but if you want to guarantee that for your CEO, for your CTO, you want to do tests, you need to have a platform that deploy and automate these things quickly. So of course, you know, if you're working like in a hackathon project, so it's going to be like something small, but with the time, this project is going to be big, right? And when you want to publish a new version of your app, you need to upload this APK to the Google Play, or maybe, yeah, to the Google Play, and then you need to do a rollout. So these kind of things you need to consider. And this is more about DevOps, but having like a continuous delivery, continuous integration pipelines, so agile is going to be helpful. So again, I think that's something that changes, or well, something that is a factor to influence in the startups is how fast they can build. And that's something that is going to be given by the A/B platform too, right? So because we want to do more experiments, right? And if you don't have the platform to publish these experiments, this is going to be like a little bit more tedious, right? So at the end, so if you're not aware about this concept, so continuous integration means that always you are building your chains. That means that you guarantee that you have everything tested. And continuous delivery means that you are constantly deploying to production, right? So that's advanced techniques, but all the companies are using that. And yeah, to finalize the adaptation, remember that adaptation means to understand your users, and nobody knows what they think the users you need to test. That's why we have the A/B testing frameworks. To adapt, you need to understand what's going on in the world. That's why we need the analytics. In terms of software, we need to be prepared to integrate these 2 components in our clean architecture. And then in terms more about DevOps, so we need to provide tooling to deploy and to build quickly. Okay, so then we have the concept of resilience, right? So I think that, you know, this term has been like a little bit overused during the pandemic, right? So the governments, the family, friends, the internet, the television, everybody was asking us to be resilient, right, about this pandemic. But yeah, at the end, the concept is like, well, if something that happens, you need to recover the state, right? So, and yeah, in terms of software, so that's something that more about cloud, more about DevOps, developer experience, right? You want to build products that they are resilient, right? So how does my system respond to challenge, right? So if you have one outage in terms of internet, right, your database is broken. So what is like your resilience in terms of this challenge? So how fast you can, or how fast you can like do a backup or recover a backup from a database. So that's something that, of course, right, so not in an early stage of the startup is going to happen, but that's something that maybe you need to take into account, right? So once you are starting to see that your product has like some value, right? So again, you have like a product like Agoda, right? So, and you cannot have like your servers down. So how you are going to work with these techniques, right? So I think that this parameter is quite interesting, right? So because we are always working with with the stability, right? We start with the stability. So is this server is on, or when the server is on, if it's accessible, right? So we can trust in that. Then if we can use it, and finally the resilience. So that's why new techniques, I think in terms of the resilience, I can talk about Google Cloud. Imagine that you have like some well, in that case we are Kubernetes, like a cluster or cluster 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 component. So one of these techniques could be like in different regions, right? So where you have like cloud storage, for instance, or you have your services, and you have replication across these three regions at the same time. Well, that's a little bit more technical, but you have different zones. What you achieve with this technique. So first of all, if something happens in the something you don't have access to this region for any reason, there is an outage, you can redirect the traffic, sorry, you can redirect the traffic to the other regions. So, and that's like about like this kind of resilience, right? Something happens in one of your areas, in one of your servers, so you can replicate. Luckily, with this in these days, so we have different techniques, so they're very clever working people on that, but that's something that you need to consider, right? So always have like a plan B, right? If something happens, and not anymore having like two machines at your home or in your office, right? It's going to work. So the cloud is the response on that. And finally, I want to mention that something about more personally, right? So, but I think that in terms of startups is quite relevant. So I think that that's not something only for companies, right? You can check the article here, but so let me explain. So in terms of these concepts about, we have like fragile, that's something that breaks, right? So, and then we have like the resilience, the thing that we were mentioning, that if something breaks, if one server has an outage, we want to recover. But how we recover to the same state, that's the optimal way, right? If one database is lost, the data has lost, was the resilience of the database recover the data as it was in the previous state. That's the resilience. But let me introduce you this concept about anti-fragile, right? Anti-fragile. That's a concept that is a little bit overused nowadays. And I think in the startup world, right? So on the economic world, everybody wants to talk about this. But that's something quite interesting, because I think that anti-fragile means that uh, when something happened, when you have like a stress, like when the database is broken, when something has happened, anti-fragile, that means that you don't go to the same state, you go to a better state. So from something that bad happens, you grow, you become better. And so I think that's the spirit in some companies too, in the startups, right? So that's the opportunity, right? And of course, nobody has like having this in mind, and if, of course, if you have these crazy ideas, right? So about building a company, a startup. So I think that sometimes, right? So after something happens, maybe you can have like, you can become better and bigger. So something to consider. So if you're interested more about this, coming from one idea of Taleb, is one author where he's explaining this concept. I think that's quite interesting. Okay, next thing is about randomness. So let me explain you a little bit. So, okay, so software engineer, very methodological, very, the processes. I think at the beginning of my career, well, I think that until a few years ago, I was a little bit bothered when somebody told me about, hey, no, you are lucky, or well, you have to do that because luck, right? And as engineers, we don't like to think about, or we don't like the concept of luck, because we know that the luck doesn't exist, right? And I was a little bit bothered, right? And you told me, no, you have luck, or you don't have luck, right? So I think, no, I don't believe in luck. But let me tell you that these thoughts have changed a little bit in the past, right? And not about because I believe in luck, right? But that's something that I know that like that exists. It's like the randomness. So, and we can ignore that the random things exist, right? So the world is random. So the complexity of the world is like on that level that we don't understand what's going on, right? Nobody's understanding what's going on, and never. So I mean, I tell you that nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow in the market. Nobody, right? So if it knows, it's because another because it has some information, right? But we don't have a way to predict what's the exactly price of something. And randomness is something that at the end it has been applied for different concepts in science too, right? So for instance, for cleaning the sounds, like the signal. So well, the telecommunication engineers, they're applying like random noise to clean up the signal too, right? And that's something that is there. And sometimes I think that we underestimate the randomness in our careers, and not only about uh, software, but in general. So I think that, imagine the Google guys that they went to Alta Vista. I don't remember, right? So they were rejected, right? So, and they now are like one of the biggest companies in the world, right? And you can say that no, it's talent. Well, of course it's talent, but they were rejected the first time, right? So I mean that, and that's something that, so these kind of random events, that's something that we underestimate, and they're there. And let me show you something. Sorry, I didn't. This was like from one tweet I saw the other day, but I forgot to put the tweet. But let me put you in this way, right? So that's very cool. So this is like the life path that was like close to you, right? And of course, because we have only one life, we are not living in the multiverse yet, so we only have this is actually how it looks in this tree, right? So there are like this life path close to you, but you have like one here and it's like your life today. But ahead of you, we have the same problem, right? So, and I think that by myself, I can tell that I think that some of parts of my life here so has been like for random success, right? Too, I think that when I start working with, or when I start having like the interest of Android, was totally random, right? So, but at the same time, maybe in these days, in this hackathon, you're going to, well, meet somebody that maybe is going to be your, well, to colleague at work, or your successful colleague in a startup, and it's going to be like totally casual things, right? And we cannot control that. But my point is like, we need to consider, or we don't have to underestimate these things, right? So sometimes we can feel bad because we didn't pass one Google interview, or because, I don't know, so something bad happens, right? But at the same time, remember about this picture too, right? So there are more paths, so, and you don't know what's like going to be your path. And actually, so maybe all of them, they're going to drive you to the success, right? But sometimes, or well, usually that doesn't happen like that. And sometimes you can feel like bad because you're a startup, I don't know, you didn't receive attention because you don't sell the whatever, right? So I try to keep like this mind too, right? Something like this happens. And let me tell you one stupid thing, right? But when I moved to the States, so I moved in November, something like this in 2019. And the rest of the history, right? For a month arrived the pandemic. So, well, with the pandemic, there was like this immigration laws where the president at that time didn't allow to enter new immigrants to work, right? And I was like in a position where I was like one of the top 10 build engineers, because maybe there was 11, no, because I was very good, right? And, so different companies were calling you, and there was not because I was good. It was like because there was a different consequences that puts you there. So again, this is very philosophical. I'm sorry about that, right? But I want to sometimes, right, because I saw a lot of people, right, that they got like this motivated or frustrated because they didn't achieve one goal, right? And I told you, right, so I have like this 40 years old. So life is long and wide, right? And remember about these things. Okay, so we're finishing. Then we have like security. I'm not a security engineer, so I don't have like the skills to give you about security. But since the day one, since the day two, put security in mind, right? There are like stupid things like, I don't know, so you are putting a key because you are using Firebase and you are putting this key in the code. Don't do that, right? Start to get in some discipline, some good practices instead of using that passwords or whatever. And if not, well, so look, this happens last week, right? So you know about that, about what happened with Uber. So this is a screenshot, you don't see, well, very good. It's a screenshot of the hacker that he joined the Slack of the company and he put a message, Uber, this company is valued more than billions and billions and billions of dollars. Now, how embarrassing is that for one company, for the investors, for the users? So everything. And not only that, so when you're working for the government and you have some breach in terms of data, you are going to receive a huge amount of fines. So something from considering your startup from the first day. So security, if you don't work in that moment, so maybe it's going to be late when you want to do that. So anything happens from Uber. Okay, final point, it's about community. That's something very personal too. So because yeah, it's one thing that for me was very important in my career was the community. And here I want to share you a picture of the North Beach in Penang with my friends there. So we spent like one of the years, I guess that maybe here is the first year. But that's something that sometimes community is about conferences, right? So it's about sharing. It is about friendship too, right? So the people that you are going to know in a hackathon, in a conference, they're people that they are aligned with you, right? So, and that's something to take into account, right? So because at the end, the world is a little bit small, right? So and you can have like these connections, these networks, and maybe one guy that you have met in one conference, he's going to help you to do an interview in a company that he's working. And community as well is GitHub. Community is a Stack Overflow. Community is Twitter, is Discord, is all the different platforms that we have today to share, to learn, to ask. And from the first day, you can interact with that. So this is not an special club where you can do something or not. This is something that you can start doing from the beginning. And yeah, with that, so that's my last slide. So I think that I have a video here. It's a little bit maybe embarrassing, but let me see, I can put it. Yeah. Sorry, but you know, because everything was about sailing, about the Odyssey, that's me trying to come back home to Mallorca. I think it's going to be a little bit complicated from Los Angeles, right? But yeah, so thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. Again, this presentation has been a little bit more personal about my experience in the career. And if you want to contact me, this is my Twitter or whatever. I'll send before the presentation to the organizers. And now I don't know if we have questions, but I'm going to stop sharing and let me know if we have how we are going to work now, or that's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Inaki, for the knowledgeable and interesting session just now. Once again, you can leave your questions in the chat box to be answered in the following Q&A session. As we promised, we will go ahead and take some questions for the Q&A session. So we have the first question here, that is, do you think that it's better to be specialized in one programming language or master multiple languages?
I think that's more important to learn the foundations and move to different languages, as we saw before in the presentation. So of course, if you specialize in Java, right, so it's going to be helpful to move to another JVM languages like Scala, Kotlin, and so on. So at the end, if you specialize one, it's going to be helpful for another languages too.
So we have here the second question is, can you share your experience in cloud computing if you had any?
Yeah, so I work with providers, with big providers like Google and Amazon. And for my personal projects, I was using a lot Google and Amazon too. Actually, in the States here, everything is with Amazon, AWS. And I can tell you that it's a different world, totally, right? So here, if you can master on AWS, you're going to have a job for 10 years, but absolutely, absolutely. So that's something very passionate because cloud computing is what is moving the world today. All the companies are having like the cloud there, and that's a very cool area. So sadly, my area is mobile, but cloud, I would say that is the biggest one today.
The next question is, do you have any advice for students who are looking forward to working overseas?
Okay, so well, studying computer science, start working with GitHub and joining communities and well, seeing like different conferences or Google Devfest and yep.
Is there any differences in the working culture between the West and the East?
Well, I would say that the West, I would say that, well, between Spain, Ireland, and the States, I think that in the States, there's like this culture of working more, but technically, I think that we are not working more, right? So, and in the East, well, I think that we were working a lot too, right? But because you are like new, you are from other country there, right? So it was quite interesting too, right? Maybe in the States, there are like a lot of immigration, right? And you are one more, right? But in the East was like with more people from different countries, and it was like at the same time more same. But so in terms of software, no, there are no differences. I'm sorry, you need to work a lot.
Okay, so as a question from me is, do you have any advice for those who are self-learning the programming?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Do you have any advice for those who are self-learning programming?
Oh, okay. So, well, using like GitHub, trying to publish projects to GitHub, trying to start working with Git, seeing code is very helpful too. In GitHub, you can see repositories from Telegram, from different apps, and you can learn for free for that. So using GitHub.
So I think there's no more questions right now. So we can, oh, sorry, there is one. Your thoughts about Flutter, please.
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. Flutter, to put in context, is a framework platform used by Google that actually is multi-platform. And actually, it's working very well, right? So I think that for a startup is one tool to take like in account, right? Because, you know, you don't have time maybe or resources to have like iOS developers, Android developers, and Flutter fits this requirement. So of course there is some polemic in the community, right? But my opinion is that it's an awesome platform.
Thank you, Mr. Inaki, for providing us with amazing tips and tricks in answering the questions for our fellow curious participants. It is our utmost pleasure to have Mr. Inaki with us today. We hope all participants have gained some useful knowledge from our speaker today. Before we end this quick talk, we would like to invite everyone to turn on your cameras for a group photo session with Mr. Inaki. Kindly turn on your camera and put on your picture perfect smile.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you very much for everything.
We're gonna take the picture now. We were waiting for everyone to turn on their camera. Sorry.
Okay, well,
okay. So since everyone has their camera turned on, so we put on our best smiles while the technical team take picture. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, say cheese. Seems like we have quite a number of participants. We'll kindly hold on as our team check for the pictures. All right. Thank you so much for the, you may turn off your cameras if you want, or you may leave it on. Sadly, this talk has come to an end. Fret not, we have exciting news for everyone. There will be another equipped talk on 24th September, upcoming Saturday at 8 a.m. this morning. Mr. 𝗘𝗏𝗄𝗧𝗋 His𝗹 will be sharing on how to build prototypes with Figma. Everyone is welcome to join us for another informational talk. Thank you everyone for spending some time with us this morning. We truly appreciate your presence. Thank you and hope to see you soon.